Markers. They tend to be a kind of area of interest and something that a lot of students and teachers struggle with, how to go about them, what to get. There are a few different brands here. One of the ones that is most commonly seen inside classrooms are the Pro markers. Reason being is because of the cost effectiveness. I have used, you get your Copic markers, which are a really good quality marker. They will probably cost around $15 or so. In terms of quality and what they put on the paper, there's not a huge difference between the two. But what you'll find is the Copic markers last a lot longer. And the other benefit to a Copic marker, if I can find it, is you get an actual refill. So this is a refill for a specific shade, so that's a C2 refill. Cool Grade 2, which essentially that marker is there. Now the refills from there to there don't necessarily work all that well. But because they're so cheap, essentially if you get kind of a year and a half out of a marker that you use relatively often, you're doing pretty well. With these here, I can be using semi-often and I can get kind of a year quite comfortably out of them, to 2 years. And the ones I don't use that often, I can get kind of 4 or 5 years. And these refills here, you'll probably get another probably 4 or 5 goes, 4 or 5 refills out of here. So that's just showing the difference between these, because these are roughly $5 with getting kind of teacher discounts, $5, $6, yeah. So those are two things there about markers and what you have. You also have Letraset. I apologise for these ones looking quite scummy. These ones here are just a little bit more expensive than the Copic marker. These do have refills as well. So standard chisel tip on this end, but what it has is it's got a very fine tip. We zoom up there. Okay, very fine tip. And then as you notice here as well, if you pull that off, then you got your standard tip as well. So that's the biggest difference there, and this is probably a $15 marker. And honestly, I can't really justify the big difference between the two. Copic markers have more colours. You're looking like 400 colours versus like 120. So realistically, in terms of students and how it's going to affect them, not a big deal. Professionals, then obviously they're going to be a bit more fussy, but in terms of that, they're going to end up going on computer anyway. So most people don't need to have the full spectrum of colour. Right, so other thing in regards to markers is for my students, I say year 11, part of their stationery is to get the Copic markers, the Pro markers, and I have actually specified these colours here. So I've got lime green, berry red, pastel blue, okay, Cool Grade 2, and terracotta. This is to cover their basic colour spectrum. So green products, also something to symbolise grass, red to stand out, something racy, pastel blue is kind of a light enough blue, but that does glass as well as give a kind of a blue feel to a product. I had previously done this colour as well, but as you look next to it, it's quite a bright blue and doesn't do glass very well, but obviously if you want something to have an electric blue, then sky blue works. And then the Cool Grade 2 is, when you're using it as just a tonal shade, it works really well. It's not too different from white to stand out to be really harsh. And I will show you how to get more shades out of these. And then terracotta is obviously your wood kind of decking, wood grain, all that kind of colour. So that kind of covers their pretty basic range for year 11 really, really well. And then obviously if you've got a class set of markers that they can use to do the other colours, that have them right. But when they're home and they need to do homework and they need to do some rendering and bits and pieces to tidy up, there's not a huge fight over markers and they have got their own stuff at home. So I find this range has worked pretty well with my students. So that there is something to keep in mind. And also if you look at the rendering basics, it's going to show you how you get more than one shade. Okay, if you are wanting to waste money on markers, then buy Cool Grade 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, I can get this to go Cool Grade 2, 3 and 4 essentially, because as you know, when you put a marker down, a stroke, and then it dries and you go over again, it goes a shade darker. So I'm showing you how to use that deliberately to kind of work with your colour ranges and extend this. So you're not just getting the standard shade there, you're getting the light, medium, dark with each of these markers. So what I'll do is I'll show that to you now, and then we'll get into doing some basic shapes. But this here is a real good way for teachers and students to be introduced to markers and to know how to be doing it. So this here is your pretty standard tonal shade box. So I'll just zoom in and we'll have a look. Right, so that's it here. So from that we can do all tonal shades. As you already noticed, I've got something underneath it because it does go through. So any old backs of pads are really, really good for that, and it's just something you hold and you keep on you at all times. Otherwise, yeah, if you want to cut out cardboard for them, or them to you find just use 2 or 3 sheets just to be safe, then that's fine. So what I'm essentially going to say is this is light, medium, dark, and this is 0. This is white. So essentially what I tend to do is I use 1, 2, 3 as my light source numbers, so obviously that's where they correspond. Reason why I use that is in terms of what surface is lightest to darkest, it's the order in which the sun hits the surface, so first, second, third, which makes a lot of sense and translates quite well. And plus with the markers, what that means is you go over it once, twice, 3 times to get those 3 shades. So what I'm going to get everyone to do is get a colour out. I'll show you with the cool grey because it's probably the most effective to show getting the different shades, and it's where a lot of people waste their money. So just try and get a good contact. Okay, so you can see that contact, it's drying. It has, it's a little bit, it's kind of doubled over, but what you need to learn with markers is you kind of just need to let it be. The extra you kind of fiddle and tweak and do your bits and pieces, it's going to kind of get those different patches come through, and it's just going to cause things like the over bit here. Those are things that if you're doing a kind of more of a presentation type thing, you can cut out, or you can use thicker pen around the edges, like a kind of a black pen, to not a ballpoint though because it bleeds like crazy, but an ink pen, a pilot pen, so like one of these things, to go over it. So you use your pilot pen and just thicken up some of those ones, particularly if you only just gone over it. It's a bit much obviously to thicken up with, to help cover those things. There's a few kind of cheeky tips there to go over with that stuff, or you'll see through all my other videos. So that's obviously had enough time to dry, so we'll leave that as gone over once. We'll go over this side now twice. So you can see kind of 2 different clear shades there, but from there you can also see this is essentially, it should be as dark. When you've gone over it twice, it should be essentially as much as the paper can soak up from the front. So I shouldn't really be able to do that. So what happens is if I had been streaky over here on a side that's going to be medium darkness, or a number 2, it doesn't matter, because when we go over it, we've gone over it so much that the page can't soak up any more ink, and all these little strips and slightly missed gaps and that all get fixed up. So we're going to go over our number 3 side as well, because we need to go over it 3 times. Now you would have just heard me say that you're going over a number 2 side virtually as much as the page can soak up, which is kind of making people wonder, well, how do we make it any darker then? So I will show you that very shortly. So one, I've only gone over it once. Now depending on how quick you go will depend on how light or dark your shade is. I went quite steadily over it. If you rush a bit and you do it quick but obviously tidy, it means that when you do your 2 shade, like you saw when I first put it down, I had room to make it darker again, and it kind of gives you a few different kind of subtleties with the shades between, so you're kind of going 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3 there. So to do a shade 3, what we do is we flip the page and we work from the back. So I can see where that break is, but quite often what you need to do is you need to flip the page back and forth a few times and then outline it with a pencil. See what it is. So the front of the page has soaked up as much ink as it can, but the back of the page hasn't. It still can soak up some more. So this is where we go over again. Fill it in. So you just need to kind of be a little bit liberal. Okay, I'm not being super fussy about keeping them within the lines because obviously this is just a colour square. But when you're doing this, if you do go and wander over the lines, you're going to see it when we flip it over. So now, as we flip back over, you can see 1, 2, 3. Obviously 2, 3 are a lot closer than 1 and 2. So what we need to do then is we'll just go over one more time, but very quickly. And that'll help give you 3 different shades. So if we need to go over this 3 side again, just to try and make sure it's as dark as it possibly can be, that's what we do. But essentially there you can see 1, 2, 3 different shades, and this is showing you where a cool grey number 2 now has your few different shades. And you can also see next to each other, particularly before I went over this, again, was that it's not a huge contrast over it. So essentially, if you want to leave this as your highlight with where the light is, as white, or whatever your paper colour is, and then 1, 2, 3, it's giving you a lot of spectrum of shade within any given marker. So that shows that. The other thing that you'll need to test with given paper is that if you have a line, and what you try to do is you try and draw right up to it and see how much it bleeds. Now, photocopy papers actually tends to be pretty alright. The art watercolour paper, the ones that are a thicker kind of gauge, those tend to have a lot of bleed because they're used to trying to being able to soak up and absorb watercolours and that. So that's where you've got to be careful. So some of them, you virtually need to actually leave like a gap that big, and then the marker will bleed up to it. Now if you're using paper like that and it's doing a lot of soaking, what it's going to do is going to eat through your markers like crazy. So I tend to use the Gordon Harris pads. They've got one that's called a bank pad, which is very thin, works really well, and that will work. Otherwise, I also got this one here, which is a Zeta pad. This is kind of the next stage up. This is kind of a $20 pad for 100 sheets though, but a $20 pad, so it is reasonably expensive. But the bank paper works just fine, and it has hardly any bleed, and also the pages are quite thin, so you can see through them really well. So they have other benefits for the tracing and that. So that there is all your marker basics in terms of kind of how to look at them, how to view them, how to buy them, and give you guys some background knowledge on how to approach them. And now I'm going to go into doing some shapes and go from there.